This talk, I add to it every year, actually, with new papers and stuff that come out. So some of you that have heard me and my takes on this will be a refresher. But for those of you who haven't heard it, basically, um, I try and present some data and some thoughts regarding applying and matching orthopedics. It's growing increasingly competitive. It's a much different game even than when I was applying, and it's also much more competitive, and it gets more competitive every year. And so the goal of this is to kind of give a brief overview um, of what I think you should be doing each year, and then brief overview and strategies of what I think you should be doing to match orthopedics. And then I'll present some data to back up what I think, because I believe in being evidence-based. And then I will take some questions. If you're wondering, where my, I guess my thoughts on this come from and why I feel I'm qualified to give these thoughts, is that I have been neurotically obsessing with this game for almost a decade now, and have been very involved with our orthopedic surgery program since I was a first year medical student. So now this will be my ninth year of watching medical students come through this program. I've heard, for 9 years, all the talks of what people do well, what they do bad, etc. The other thing too is that I have a big role in screening all the applications that come through to our program, and for 3 years now, I've personally read each and every application that's come through. So I have a pretty good mental data bank of what applications for orthopedic surgery look like, especially for DOs. So with that, we'll get started. We'll just start out here with first year MS1. Really, the biggest thing you can do to help yourself up is not, do anything that's going to trip you up. Especially nowadays, where most schools are pass fail and where boards are pass fail. Really, the big thing you want to do here is just get settled in nicely to medical school and to becoming a competitive applicant. Things that you have to start as a first year, if you want to, get off on the right foot, would be leadership. I would try and at least become friends with the AOAO leadership at your school. I would definitely make sure that you start going to the AOAO meetings, even as med students, even as first years. There's a good student section, and you should be there, because this is going to be one of the most important things, in my opinion, to matching orthopedics. And I'm going to repeat myself throughout this talk, but the people who go to those meetings are the people who are really serious about this usually, and those people match. So if you're a first year and you go to these meetings, well, you're going to be there with second, third, and fourth years and residents, right? So those fourth years, those are going to be the people who match that year. The third years are the people who match the next year. The second people the next year. I've met so many people above and below me in timeline at these meetings that I'm still friends with. And it really, really helps to have these connections for many reasons. And so you need to start going as a first year. If you are beyond first year and you haven't gone, you're not necessarily behind the eight ball. I'm not trying to say that you're screwed if you haven't done this. What I'm saying is this is just something you can do to help yourself if you're a first year right now. The other thing I'll add is this is a super long journey. I wish somebody would have talked to me about making sure that I try to take care of myself during this journey, because it's so hard. I got so focused on getting to where I wanted to be that just make sure you stay in shape. Make sure that you're evaluating where you're at mentally the whole time. Okay. And it all starts as a first year. MS2, this is where things really kind of take off. In prior years of this talk, we would talk about the stats of boards and why they're so important. Well, now it's pass fail for all of you. And that should apply to pretty much everybody on right now. And so really, again, as an MS2, it's the same game as MS1. Don't do anything that's going to trip you up. Make sure you go to the AOAO meetings. Any research that you could get started as a first year, which I think is very important, needs to be starting to be finished up as a second year so you can start some new projects. During these 2 years, it's very important that you try and get involved in research. It's kind of a new standard. Back in the day, back when I was a med student, need research to match DO ortho just because nobody had it, right? Well, and you still don't need it, but you know, it really makes you stand out, and it's starting to be more mainstream on the DO front to need the research too, just because of how competitive it's getting. And so you need to be trying to find opportunities to publish. We'll talk about this a little later, but you don't need a super robust research infrastructure to get good publications. We certainly didn't at OSU when we started our team basically with Dr. Vassar, and now that thing is taken off to be its own machine, but it wasn't a machine at first, right? It started by us and Dr. Vassar just reading articles that somebody else had done. It was mostly computer based. You didn't need a real lab. And you're going, well, we could do that. We could appraise these articles using some standardized tool, just like these people did. And so really for me, unfortunately, if you're an applicant out there and your excuse is, well, we don't have a research infrastructure at my school. Well, I don't really buy it anymore for multiple reasons. Number one, there's opportunities out there and you can find them. But number two, I've had multiple students from multiple different schools with no research infrastructure who did the same thing we did, where they are basically saying, hey, this group did this study in plastic surgery, looking at this, we could do that. And then they do it. And especially there's a group that I've been working with in Texas at the UIW school, and we've got some in JSES and JBJS and big freaking journals, and they don't really have an infrastructure. They just have people willing to work, right? And so I would try and find a mentor who can help you do research. But also, if you don't have it, try and dig in, try and do a systematic review. A lot of this stuff, we just kind of do it on the fly, and you see what happens, and it gets peer reviewed, and they give you advice on how to make it better, and then you do that. So years 1 and 2, you've got to be building up research by building up connections, because those connections are going to be what carry you forward to know where to rotate and match. MS3, probably the biggest year for matching orthopedics. You really have to start thinking about it as an MS3, and that's why it's no longer it's a dream. You got to start planning a little bit, right? I think it's critical as an MS3 to attend the fall AOAO because then there's a big program director panel. You can meet program directors, residents, and also students who are currently rotating. You can pick all of their brains to try and decide where you want to rotate. And then that's also a big deal, because then all these students and stuff that you just met that just match, well, now you have an in at the program. If you made a good impression, right? You can be like, hey, whatever your name is, like, it was fun hanging out with you in Chicago, AOAO. I'm coming to rotate with you guys. Looking forward to it. It's going to be fun. And you immediately have someone who's like, oh, Jake's coming to rotate. That's cool. I met him. They're a decent person, and so that is what I would say about that. Make sure you go to that if you can. When you're prepping your programs, are you going to apply to MD or DO? We're going to touch on this later. Take care of step 2. The slide says don't go down. Well, now that doesn't apply. So now you guys just have to decimate step 2, because it's certainly going to be used as the new step 1. And we'll talk about stats later on that. You need to start asking for your letters of rec early, right? And you need to think about this. You need good letters of rec if you really want to stand out. And later, I'm going to tell you what I think a good letter of rec is and show you examples. But moral of the story is, in order to get a good letter of recommendation, you have to spend time with someone, right? You're not going to have, you can certainly have a positive letter of recommendation with someone you've spent less than a month with. They can say that you're a good person and you worked hard in your rotation, but you're high if you think that they're going to know you well enough to write a letter that truly moves the needle for you, right? They're going to write a letter for you that passes the sniff test and keeps you moving forward and doesn't hurt you, but it's not going to move the needle. It's just going to be totally neutral for you. So that means that early in your third year, you got to start scheming, right? You got to start being like, hey, this person is someone that I'm going to want to ask a letter for, and you make sure that you hang out with them. we'll talk about what I think good letters are and who to get them from later are. You should be finishing up your research as an M3 because you apply in September of M4. And really, if it's not submitted by December to February of your third year, it's likely not going to be published by the time your application goes in. So that's why as an M1 and 2, it's so important if you're doing research to really work hard on it because, the deadline for it being really impressive on your resume, if all goes well and you get accepted to your first or second journal you submit it to, is probably December to February. So I would really think about that. Um, at this point, you should start considering a research year, no matter how good your numbers are. Um, you know, I, but unfortunately, step two kind of hurts you guys because before you could be like, my board scores are average, but I'm a good person. I think I work hard. If I do a research year, it'll give me a little edge. You don't have that anymore. You take step two right before you're about to rotate. And so I understand why that's really hard. And that, if you think that you want to be a hero and go to an academic residency, then, maybe you should just plan on one from the start because really, you need that. And so I would consider a research year at this point. I would never discourage anyone from it. But the only thing that I'll add is that, and we'll touch on this later, is I think that from looking at how, like I said, I've read every DO application over the last 3 years. We're able to see where they match. I know where they all go. Doing a research year used to be like, oh, if you want to match MD, do your research year. Doing a research now, if you're a decent rotator, is more like hey, do you want to make your chance of matching orthopedics go from 50 to 80%, but you're still going to probably match at a DO program? That's what it is, right? You're not increasing your ceiling, you're increasing your chances of matching. Does that make sense? And much of this has to do, actually all of that has to do with the match rate for the MDs, right? The MD match rate's low too now, right? It used to be 80+% of the MDs match and around 60% of the DOs. Well, now it's 50-60, right? So their match rate's so low that the honest truth of it is these programs don't even have to look at the best and brightest DO students anymore because they're flooded with MD students. And that's the sad reality of it, but that's just the truth, and so there's ways with signaling to increase your odds at these programs, and we'll talk about that later. But you really need to start thinking about your letters and a research year at this point. So MS4, you're doing your auditions, right? Most DO programs will require you to do an audition to be, truly considered by their program. There's a handful that will interview non-rotators, such as ours, but the big players on our rank list are always those who rotate, and that goes for most DO programs. Most MD programs do not have this requirement. However, research does show that your odds of matching there go up significantly if you rotate there. My opinion on how to perform well on auditions, first and foremost, you have to have Pocket Pimp down cold. That's the best resource. Don't get too convoluted. You don't need Pocket Pimp and netters and this and that. The guys who made Pocket Pimp did an amazing job of consolidating all those resources. If I had Pocket Pimp to memorize still, which I don't, I would almost never miss a question, even as a resident. There's just not much more to ask. There's conceptual things, I guess, that would be over the head of a med student, and there's philosophical treatment decisions, but not just hard facts, really, and so have it down cold, do the Anki decks. I know they're circulating out there. You need to have that down cold before you start your first audition. It's not time to start during July because you want to make a name for yourself. I say here, just be likable. Unfortunately, that's the sad truth of this is that if you're not likable, it's too competitive. It's not going to work out for you. You've got to be able to be a chameleon. You've got to be able to fit in with different types of people, different groups of people. You've got to be able to fit in with the people who self-select to match in California. You got to be able to fit in with the Michigan people. You got to be able to fit in with the New York crowd. And it's all different people. But if you really want to be successful, you've got to be able to be a chameleon and be able to succeed in multiple environments with multiple different people, or it's just straight up not going to work out, unfortunately. you can have the best app in the world and you're not going to match orthopedics without a little luck, unless you're a likable person. ERAS, you need as an MS4, even late MS3, you got to start thinking about how to tailor your ERAS application. We're going to talk about that coming up here. For your interviews as an MS4, you need to have your application down inside and out, every research paper, every experience, and not just what you did, but how it shaped you. That's how you become a good interviewee for anything, whether it's a job or residency or just meeting somebody, at a meeting. You have to be able to talk about your experiences and translate them in a relatable way that's going to be memorable. So if you can't naturally do this, you need to work on it. I used White Coat Coaching. She has a little interview prep thing where she'll interview you, and it actually helped a ton. I really recommend it. And then you have to have some stuff made up for each program you go to, because they're going to ask you, they're going to be like, well, why would you want to come here? Why would you fit in here? Blah, blah, blah. You have to have this stuff down, and it's got to be real, not just like, oh, well, I heard you guys have a good program. And it's like, yeah, we do, but why do you want to be here? Like, we want people who are going to thrive with us. And so for each program, you need a tailored response to this question. And then letters of intent, people are going to say they're not important. They're liars. They're very important. If there's somewhere you want to be, if you have a clear-cut number one, you need to tell them. One scenario would be like if they straight up say, hey, absolutely no post-interview communication with us as a program, then maybe not. But even then, I'd still let one of the residents know, like, hey, I'm ranking you number one. It's very important. There's a competitive process. If we have 5 people who we equally liked and 2 people who are telling us that they're going to rank us 1, I can almost guarantee that those 2 people are going above the other 3. And that doesn't mean that and I've had people in the past just be like, dude, like, I really liked you guys. I ranked you number 1. Like, I wish I would have matched with you. And I'm like, hey, if you would have just told us that, it might have moved the needle. And so it's kind of an illegal thing. Like, you can't request information from either side, right? As an applicant, you can't be like, hey, where am I at? And we can't be like, hey, where'd you put us? But you can divulge information. And I highly encourage you to do so wherever your top programs are. The other thing is, don't say too much. All it can do is hurt you. Every single year, we'll have a handful of people come out and message us and be like, hey, just wanted to let you know I loved everything about your program and I'm ranking you really highly. Look, if you say that to us, that means you're not ranking us number 1. And it almost hurts you because it's like, okay, well, they're not real serious about us. Then you go back to like trying to figure out which applicants are really serious about your program, right? And so I just wouldn't say anything, right? Like, I would either say they're your number 1, or I would say nothing. And then, just be cordial and be a normal human, right? If the residents text you, be cool and be like, oh yeah, I love it. You may be in a scenario, this happened to me at several programs where I got several calls actually from program directors where they're like, hey, basically we're ranking you to match. And you've got to have a good response for this, honestly. Like, people say you don't, but you do. And I always just blamed my wife. And so I'm not saying that you should blame your significant other, but I would always say something like, hey, I loved this program. I think it's a perfect fit for me because of X, Y, Z. And I'd give them real reasons. And I'd be like, and me and my wife are going to go travel to our top 3 programs, and she's going to help me pick our number 1. So I can't say anything right now, but like, I'm really hoping that she wants to be here like I do. And then like they'd be like, oh, awesome. They loved that. So I would, if you get put in a weird situation by a program, and it does happen, and that's a good sign that you're doing the right things and they're not your number 1, you can't just say, oh, I'm ranking you highly, right? Because they're like, it's a game. And I know them coming at you is illegal, and I'm not trying to say it's not, but like, this is a game, so just have something thought up. And that goes back to your interview prep. You have to know why you like a program and why you can be a chameleon there. Here's some stats for you. I'll direct you to the top left at first. Figure 6. This is from this year's match data. Percentage of unmatched MD and DO seniors who ranked orthopedics as their first specialty. Not good numbers there for us. Those, it's just not, a lot of people don't match orthopedics on both sides. This is a summary from last year's match data. showing the average applicant. And as you can see, it's a competitive process. You have to have good board scores, you have to have research experiences. You see matched on the left, unmatched on the right. This is for DOs last year. And as you can see, there's differences on from the left to the right. You know, the left is pretty much better in every way, but could we call it statistically significant? Probably not, right? Like it's not that much different. And what does that mean? It means that everyone applying orthopedics is competitive, and you actually have to do something to stand out outside of paper, right? Paper is the minimum. Paper is not going to get you a spot anymore. Back, you know, a decade ago, there seriously were DO programs that would just literally rank people by their board scores. Bang, 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 bang. Oh, they got an 800, they're 1, 750, they're 2, 720, they're 3. It doesn't work like that. It's way too competitive to do that now. And the programs are way more involved in getting the right fit of people, right? And so what this graph means to me, my interpretation of this is that you have to do something to stand out outside of paper. It's the bare minimum, and it all involves with being a smart rotator and a smart signaler now, and a smart communicator when it comes to going to these meetings and getting the right connections. Here is the COMLEX level 2 and USMLE step 2, because step 1 is out. And again, this tells me the same thing. Like you can look at the orthopedic surgery numbers, and obviously it's significantly higher, especially in COMLEX for those that match orthopedics. But it's much narrower for step 2. And again, what this tells me, what I would take away from this if I'm you guys, is you have to be, you know, decent, right? Like it looks like just eyeballing that you really want to be above a 240 on step 2. And you really want to be above a 600 on level 2. But after that, all that did was get you in the game, right? You're not going to get a spot because of it. And unless you're really low, you're probably not going to lose a spot because of it. And so that's my thoughts on that one. Here is another, oops, that's a blank slide. Here is another one. This one, I believe, is looking at the year before. And the reason I like this graph is because if you can look at the steps for 220 to 230, 230 to 240, and 240 to 250, it's really not that big of a difference, right? Like and the real cutoff is 250. If you get above a 250, you're really Gucci compared to the other ones. But and you see the same thing with level. And so it again, you can no longer just be like, oh, well, I'm an M1 and an M2. I'm just going to focus on my boards because that's what's most important. Because it's really freaking not. Like you're not impressing anyone with your board scores anymore. Like nobody cares. It's too competitive for that. Even if you have an 800, whoop-de-doo, what else do you have? You know? And so that's my take on that. How many interviews is adequate? I love this slide. This is mixed data from this year and last year. As you can see, bottom left, which is this year, I think this is great because you can see all these other specialties. There's the blue is much more than the green, right? Orthopedics, it's not, right? 6 ranks was the average she matched. 4 was the average who didn't match, right? Again, it's not that big of a spread. But what this means is when you go on your rotations, right? Assuming you're going to do 5 rotations because you're smart, you have to get an interview of all of them. All of them. If you mess up on even 1 rotation and you don't get an interview and you don't get any non-rotator interviews, well, now you're at 4. Now you're in the average people who don't match. Because if you're not getting all your interviews, chances are you're not that good of a rotator. Okay, that's the honest truth. And so the people who get 6, right, hardly anyone can do 6 rotations. If you can, awesome. The people who get 6 are the people who get all of their rotator interviews and manage to snag a couple non-rotator interviews, right? So it says you're good on paper. It says you're a good rotator. That's a good mix. But again, nothing's guaranteed. I love the top right slide from the previous years. This is 2 years ago. And essentially what this shows is once you get up to 8 interviews, your chances of matching is 90+%. And the reason I like this is because it shows that it just reinforces that if you can get all your rotator interviews, you've got 5, boom, done. Well, let's look at that chart. Your chance of matching is pretty good on that, right? Like, it's around 80 something percent. If you get 5, it drops off really hard after that. And if you can snag 3 non-rotators, that means that you're a good applicant on paper. It means that you're a good applicant on a rotation, and you're probably going to match, right? So this is where you want to be. This is the most important slide in my presentation, because everything I talk to you about isn't just my opinion. It's about the game. It's about how you become farther right on that top right thing, and that's how you meet people. I know that I snagged, I ended up with 16 interviews, and I know for a fact that I snagged some interviews that I didn't rotate at just because I'd met these people 4 years in a row at AOAO, right? And I still didn't rotate there. And then I hit them with some BS excuse for why I didn't rotate there, like it was too expensive or whatever. I couldn't go to that part of the country, and it worked. And it's all a game. You have to move yourself on this needle, this contiguous reins at the bottom. You've got to be farther to the right, and you've got to figure out how to do it. And that's by making connections. It's by building up your research, because some places care about it. It's about getting good board scores, because some places care more about it. And it's about crushing your auditions. You cannot afford, if you don't get one of your audition interviews, it really hurts you. Now, the most important part about auditions isn't just performing well, it's picking the right auditions, right? If you only rotate at the quote unquote best, all programs are good, DO ortho programs that are highly selective, and you rotate it, let's say you rotate at 2 MD interviews, you could be screwed. Like, say you went to, let's say your rotation was this, and if I give anyone a panic attack, because this is what they're about to do this year, sorry, but say your audition rotations is 2 MD programs and doctors and us and Kansas City, let's say, right? So us and doctors pretty historically now will always match our top. Like for us, it's 3, for them, it's 6, right? We take 2 a year, they take 5. If there's maybe room for one odd person out there, but otherwise you're not really getting a spot at our programs, right? So you've got to be in that really top tier. Kansas City also has from I don't know if they've changed it, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but they will interview a lot of non-rotators. And from people I've talked to who go there or have been there, it is they have a lot of Kansas City students, so they're also very selective, right? So okay, cool. Well, and now you went to 2 MD programs who really don't have to look at you anymore because it's so competitive, but they will because you rotated there. Well, you just set yourself up for a world of hurt based on this graph, right? So even if you get the interviews with us and doctors, it's not, you still have to be in the top 10% to match, right? Like it, and so that's why it's so important. You have to, if your goal is I just want to match, I don't care where, you have to make connections at AOAO and through doing stuff like this and learn which programs are the one. And it doesn't mean they're a bad program. It could be location based, it could be whatever. What are the programs that get 20-ish rotators a year, interview all their rotators, and fall to 5 to 10 on their rank list, right? Because if they fall to 5 to 10 on their rank list and they only have 20 rotators and they only interview rotators, well, guess what? You have a 50% chance of matching there just by being there, right? You need a handful of programs like that. And I would consider my application to residency very competitive. Outside of Tyler Williamson, I haven't seen anybody who's really was there. And I still, and I'm not, this is not about me, this is about how committed to the game I was. I rotated a handful of DO programs I didn't have a lot of interest in because I knew those numbers, right? I wasn't like, oh, well, I'm only going to academic places and I'm only this and that. I knew the numbers. I wanted to match orthopedics. So I went to the places who gave me the best chances of matching, and I'd figure out the rest, right? Maybe I'd go to one of those places I didn't want to be at, but I would keep doing research and I'd match to a baller fellowship and I knew it. I just had to get a spot somewhere, you know? And so that I would encourage you to have that outlook because it's so competitive right now. You can't be picky. It's crazy to be picky. It's absolutely crazy. Um, and Tyler Williamson, I know where he interviewed and they're really good and he deserved all of them, but he deserved way more than he got. And, you know, I don't think he'll mind me talking about him, but he had ridiculous board scores, 100 pubs, presentations, etc., letters from NYU. If he was an MD with that, the man has 30 interviews. Easy. So that's what you got to understand is if you don't have what he has, you really shouldn't be chasing that hard, like and this is a game again. Like if you really want this more than anything, you have to prioritize matching over everything, not necessarily like the prestige, right? How much research do you need? Answer is, again, it's not that much different. As you can see, once you get over 2 research projects, the chances of matching went way up for DOs. Knowing everybody's app, I actually interpret this as it doesn't really matter, but the people who found something to do are the most driven, right? I don't think it's about the research. I think it's just the people who managed to find more than 2 projects at a DO school, especially with how poor our research opportunities are generally. They're just the most driven people, right? They were also the people going to AOAO. They were also the people doing 6 rotations. They were also the people making connections. I wouldn't interpret this as like, oh, I only have one publication, I'm not going to match, because that's not the truth at all, right? I think that you need to have research to show that you're playing ball. And I think that generally speaking, the people who are really driven have more research if they have the opportunity to do it than other people who have similar opportunities. But I get it. There's seriously are some schools out there with just straight up 0 opportunities. And you got to find a way to stand out otherwise. And I don't think it kills you to not have research. You just have to do really well on your rotation. I share this story. Our person we had this year that was ranked in our top 4, we ended up getting our top 2, and so it didn't work out. But they still matched Orthopedics because they're awesome. But they had, I don't even know what their board scores were, but they weren't good. They had no research papers. They really had nothing on paper for us. They just showed up and worked hard and kept their head down and ended up at the top, right? So if you're not screwed if you don't have any of these things, but you do have to recognize your limitations and show up ready to work, right? Here's a publication on research gap years. Really what I just like to highlight is the results. Doing a gap year for research increases your odds of matching 83%. Excuse me, 73%. And 20% match to that same institution. So if you do this, your odds of matching go up. But anecdotally, from especially the last 2 years, the people who did research years in orthopedics didn't really match any heavy, quote unquote, heavy hitters, right? All orthopedic programs are good, but when you think of like big, giant research institution, not really, and so most of them matched at DO programs. And so that's my kind of it's not really, I mean, it's anecdotal, but that's just, like I said, I looked at all the applicants, I know where they went. Like, that's just what it is. So if you want to increase your chances of matching, do this. And again, it has nothing to do with research and it has everything to do with connections. You go to these places, you do a good job, you get a bunch of publications, they write you a good letter that you never would have been able to get as a normal med student because you don't have a year to spend with somebody. And they call their buddies and they make it happen for you. And so I would highly encourage this, but you got to understand that it's not necessarily increasing your ceiling as much as it is increasing your ability to match. Does that make sense? Which again, if you're committed to the game and you're willing to give up a year, it's a good thing to do. Let's talk about a ERAS application. Many of you don't know, and I'm going to acknowledge that they've changed for this year, but I'm going to give some thoughts on that and kind of show what they used to look like. So this is mine. As you can see, board scores were meh, but this is how it pops up, right? So this is how it's going to look. to the programs, right? They're going to give all their people on their committee a stack of papers. This is the front paper. Okay. So this is how you come across. And as you can see, your board scores are right on the front. And so they're going to look at that. And so that's why a lot of times they're so biased by your board scores. Okay. They're right there. The next few pages are stuff like this. So it's going to talk about like your experiences. And I would encourage you again to talk about how you what you learned from this. Under my being like the AOAO vice president, I try to talk about like how we made it better, right? So just always put a little spin on it because you just never know what you're going to get asked about. Okay, this is good stuff. So your publications, right? If you have more than 10, what happens? Well, even if you have less than 10, so your publications are always listed by the first letter of the first author's last name in ERAS, right? So say that you have a co-author on some stupid research you did in undergrad that you don't care about. Their name starts with an A and their first author. Well, that's going to be the one that pops up at the top. Well, I mean, say your last name starts with a Z and you have a first author JBJS pub. Well, that's going to be at the bottom. So how you finagle this is when you input it into ERAS, put a 1 in front of your name on the one that you want to be at the top. That way you can choose how to organize it because, what's going to happen is people don't read your publications like you think they will. What they do is they go to this page and they look at the first one and say, hey, Jake, I see you published about deep infections following periarticular knee fractures. Want to tell me about it? Right? So you want that one to be at the top. Whatever one you think is the coolest talking point, that's what you want at the top. If you have more than 10, then you kind of have to do a little trick like I did. See how I have a period 1, because obviously 11 would come after 1 if you did this. And so you got to get a little creative like that. But that's a little nugget for you guys to take home because so whether you have a lot or whether you just have one you want at the top, you can finagle it like that. Hobbies and interests. They took this away. I don't care. Use now you get like 10 things. Use one of them for hobbies and interests. I'm telling you, you have to do this because this is what we talk about at interviews. Again, this is about the game. You are framing yourself so that when you get this interview, you're biasing people to ask you questions about things you like to talk about, right? I put that I collected sneakers and I had a little business going about it. Every single place asked me about this. And every single time I could go on, I mean, I could talk about sneakers and selling sneakers and all the crazy shit that's come from that for hours. Right. And so I just felt like I decimated all my interviews because they got me talking about stuff that I could actually talk about. And I avoided the things that I didn't like to talk about. And so if I'm you, I'm using one of those 10 sections for hobbies and interests. Little disclosure, every person says sports, every person says cooking and grilling, every person says exercise, every person says hiking. Have those in there, sure, but have something cool in there too. Shout out to Julia. I don't know if you guys know Julia, but she's at Altman in Ohio. When she came through, she put that, and she did a great job on her rotation. She's a great person. We loved Julia. Julia put in her hobbies and interests that one of them was that she kept a dream journal. And we were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We got to hear about the dream journal. And she told us about some of her crazy dreams. And as weird as that sounds, like we were like, wow, Julia's actually like super cool. And that was pretty crazy. And she totally stood out. We got talking about everyone and like everyone was like, oh yeah, yeah, Julia with the dream journal, And so like if you've got something crazy, like as long as it's not too crazy, like I would put it in there because again, you're just trying to get people to remember you in a sea of great applicants, in a sea of former athletes, in a sea of the highest achieving people in orthopedic or in medicine. You've got to find a way to stand out. So if you've got some dumb hobby, definitely put it on there. Like the dumber, the better, actually, because like I said, everybody cooks, everybody grills, everybody hikes, everybody does CrossFit, everybody works out, everybody watches football. If you do fantasy football, you better be ready for some questions about it. But that's my hot take on that. And I don't think it's that hot of a take. Okay. I told you I'd tell you about letters of rec. This is important. This is really important. This will increase not only your ceiling, but also your chances of matching. So a good letter of rec, there's tiers, right? A good letter of rec, the best letter of rec you can have is from an academic program director who says you're ranked to match. Obviously, the worst letter of rec is a bad one, but let's just say the worst positive letter of rec is from a non-orthopedic surgeon, non-academic, who just has generic stuff to say, right? And so in the tiers, to me, it would go, program director associated with a program. Then it would go faculty with a program. Then it would go like junior faculty with a program. Then it would go community orthopedic surgeon, community surgeon, honestly, probably academic surgeon over community surgeon. And then down the line, you get the point. So you want to try and get these letters from your chair of your school or a program director, but preferably orthopedics. If you can get 3 ortho letters, that's what you want. But obviously, again, back to the same as research, we just don't have those resources. A lot of DO schools, it's hard to do. But that's why earlier we talked about you've got to start planning it now. Like this is a second and third year problem. This is not a fourth year problem. If you're starting to think about who's going to write your letters as a fourth year, sorry, that's my dog. He's mad. If you're starting to think about this as a fourth year, you're screwed. Like you are behind the 8 ball then, right? So you have got to think about this early. And for you people who just decide to do orthopedics right now and you're applying in 2 months, I don't genuinely mean you're screwed. You can still match. Like I said, that person who was up at the top for us, like it was the same. That was the story. But, if you're trying to play the game, you need this thought of now. So, let's talk about this letter. So this letter I got from a guy at Mayo Clinic, right? My first rotation was at Mayo Clinic. I spent 2 weeks with this doctor. He really liked me. Okay. But I show this letter because this is the letter. You will all have this letter. Okay. Everyone has this exact same letter where somebody basically what they do is they do this. I'm so and so. I'm writing a letter for Jake. He did a good job. And then what they do, they all do this. They take your CV and they rehash your CV for 3 paragraphs. They're like, oh, he did this, and then he did that, and then he's enthusiastic, and he volunteers, and blah, 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 and he did a good job. The end. Right? Like this letter, I've seen 1,000 different copies of this same letter just written by different people. Okay. Now, does that mean this letter is bad? No. This is like the minimum, right? This is what you want to be in the game. And if you only get to spend, if you're spending less than a month with somebody, this is the letter you're getting, and that's okay, right? I'm not trying to say it's bad. Like this is what you want. They say you're a decent person. They recommend you. Cool. Next. But this is I only spent a few weeks with this person letter. There's this letter. This was from my now program director, Dr. Norris, but which is a whole different story. But I had known Dr. Norris for years, right? And so the reason this is different is because he is saying stuff outside of my CV generally, right? Talking about character, talking about where I fit into the program, talking about where I rank for the program. This is what you want. How do you get this? This all comes back to as a first year, as a second year, whenever you start this game, you've got to start thinking, right? You've got to be like, hey, I want this. Who am I going to get this letter from? Right. And it's the reason this letter is so valuable. The reason when I see an applicant with this letter that they go to the top of the stack for me personally is because I know how much work it takes to get this letter. You don't get this letter just showing up and doing a good job on a rotation. You don't get this letter, from even like a family friend. You get this letter from someone you genuinely impressed, who you genuinely took care of problems for a period of years, and they know it, right? That's what you're striving to do. And so whether it be research, whether it be connections, whether it be your letters, it takes years to really get what you want out of it, right? And that's what I'll say again, like this isn't like a gloating thing. This is 2 letters. I did a decent job on my rotation, so I got this letter. you're all going to have this letter, right? I don't have multiple Dr. Norris letters in my thing because you just can't, right? You can't make that good of connections with multiple people in this field for that long, I guess, unless you have family in the game, which I didn't. But your goal is to get this letter because you need 3 to 4 letters. You're going to have one, but you should also be trying to get one of these letters. You need a letter from a program director or program faculty or somebody, especially because there's the standardized letters now. So usually this in nowadays you'd have this letter and then a standardized, little letter ranking you attached where that would say your rank. And so if you've got a program director saying you're ranked to match, other programs are going to listen. Okay. Should you apply to DO, MD, both? If you think that you have a 250 USMLE, 600 Comlex, real life quality pubs, like JBJS, you've honored your rotations and you're diverse. And I don't mean like I like obviously diversity helps, but I also mean like you're an Olympian, you're like you've got to have some sauce there. Like you've got to have something really special there. And if that's the case, and you have all these things, and you just don't want to be a DO ortho resident, sure, go for it. I don't advise it at all. I think if you picked rotations like obviously like the Texas programs or Buffalo or places that generally take DOs almost every other year, cool, yeah, do it. But I would not advocate going for like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, HSS, Carolinas. I would not recommend that at all. Like you've got to be smart about this. This is not like if you're going to apply all MD, you've got to kind of scrape the bottom third of the barrel, if you know what I mean, which doesn't make any sense to me because there's some awesome DO programs out there, and so I wouldn't advocate going all MD ever to anyone. But if you want to, you have to have all these things. Okay. So if you want to do a combo of MD and DO, I personally think you have to have these things. And the only thing that's changed from this to the other one is the diversity thing, right? And again, I mean like diversity is in like, you went to MIT, you were a freaking Olympian, you were whatever. Like if you're really cool and you've got a really cool story that people are going to respect, awesome. Use it to your advantage. But if you're just a normal guy or gal and you excelled, you probably should just do a combo of both. What combo would I do? I would say 1 MD and 4 DO would be ideal. If you do 2 and 3, I think it's risky, but I'm not going to hate on it. I just don't love it for you. Because again, it all comes back to that slide I showed where the magic number is 8. You got to get to 8. And so if you're taking 2 or 3 of your auditions and spending them at places where it's a little risky on whether you'll get an interview or not, and a serious interview at that, they may courtesy interview you, but you need a real shot at these places. Otherwise, you really just decrease your chances of matching overall. Everybody else, people who want to play it safe, if you only have scores on your app, i.e. no research, no awesome letter, no this or that, but you just know that you're going to outwork everyone and that you're going to get a spot, DO only. And there's no shame in that. Like I said, like I don't say that like in a derogatory way towards DO programs. I just mean like you've got to protect yourself and you have to pick your rotation smartly. And so you need to really make sure that you're talking to people about kind of the scene of where they rotated it and get their thoughts on it and get multiple people's thoughts. And that means you've got to talk to 50 people about it, right? So you can make sure that if there's a trend, if people's opinions start blending together on the program, you can feel like you've kind of got it nailed down. How many programs should you apply for? This is what my slide used to say. As many as you can afford, literally, why be cheap? Okay. And I applied to over 100 programs. I spent the cash. This is what this slide used to say. But wait, preference signaling, change the game. Okay. So basically, what this study is showing is, let me move this thing, is that the chances of interviewing are much higher if you preference signal. And then this study Uh-oh. Okay, here we go. This is from this last study. So percentage of applicants who signaled a program and got an interview or number of interviews. So of the percentage of applicants who signaled, the programs are basically saying that the majority of the time, a quarter to half of the applicants that applied to their program signaled it. Okay, so that's crazy to me because that means that why would they look at someone who didn't signal them? And that's what we see on this slide is basically all the applicants are in the 75 and up category for percentage of applicants who interviewed and signaled. Really, what this study is telling you is that if you don't signal someone, you don't really have a shot, right? And this program's also said, as you can see here, the green is them signaling you played an important role in considering them for an interview. The conclusion of this study is 86% had it as an important factor deciding who to interview. And if you signaled a program, you had 26 times more likely to receive an interview from that program than if you didn't signal. So my new take on this is I would basically not apply to over 50 programs. There's no reason, right? I'd probably apply to like 40 to 50 because I'm neurotic. But honestly, you're probably fine with 30 because again, you don't really have a shot at any program you don't interview at or that you don't signal at. And basically, I would still signal all the programs you rotated at unless specifically stated, right? I don't care if the AOA cord says, oh, hey, we recommend programs, let them signal other people. No. If you rotated a program and they don't say, hey, don't signal us, we know that you're interested because you rotated, still signal them. Okay. Only signal realistic programs with at most 5 reaches and think outside the box. Again, you have to go to AOAO and get thinking about this because there's plenty of programs who are plenty of DO programs like probably ours, where if you don't signal us, you really have no chance, right? So there's 30-ish DO programs. If you're signaling 30 programs, they shouldn't all be DO, right? If you've done your homework, you know which DO programs offered interviews to people who didn't signal them. If you've done your homework and met all these people, you know which ones absolutely require it. So why would you signal a program you didn't rotate at that's a DO program that also requires you to signal them just because they're a DO program? So I think how this spread should end up looking is probably 15 to 20 DO signals and then maybe 10 MD signals, right? Because again, the MD culture is that you don't really have to rotate there. It helps you, but you don't have to rotate there. And then I'm not using my MD signals on Harvard. I'm using my MD signals on Kentucky. You know what I mean? Like I'm not, or like somewhere regional for you. So if you're from Florida, I'd signal every freaking program in Florida in the Southeast. And then the DO programs that you're really interested in at and rotated at and have a strong interest at. So definitely think outside the box here. I tell people this, do not be reactive, right? Don't go rotate at Mayo Clinic like I did because a DO matched there before, right? And they seem to match one every 5 years. Well, guess what? They didn't take this last one until the other one was moved out. And I think they do that on purpose because my year, there's 25 DOs that rotated the Mayo Clinic, right? And so what'll happen is the DO students will see, oh, so-and-so took a DO and they'll flood there. Where you want to signal or rotate as far as MD programs go are the programs who interviewed a DO without them rotating, because that shows that they're actually interested. So again, you got to talk to your friends, you got to talk to people applying and be like, hey, did you get any non-rotator interviews at MD programs? And if they say, yeah, I got one in Louisville, that's where you signal, right? Especially if they didn't take the DO that year. That's what you want. Because again, some of these places are so fickle, and like the old men in charge of these programs are so fickle that they're really not going to let it happen. I promise. And I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's the world that they live in, and we're trying to play in it, right? And so I would be really, really creative with this. And again, this goes back to making connections. You've got to be able to meet people who can tell you these things. Otherwise, you're just in the dark. Okay, Tyler literally tweeted this shit today, and I think it's so good. He's so smart. This is really it. If you're on a freaking audition, don't try and stand out. Okay, like everyone tries to be the cool person. Everyone tries to be the funny person. And Mark Johnson, shout out to him. He was my chief. He had this thing called the get up and go test with a medical student. If you are hanging out with him and you stand up to go do a consult or go do this or go do that, and you're hoping and you're happy when they get up to come with you, you've passed. If you're hoping that they stay in their seat and like whatever, you haven't passed. Okay. This is not a time to be buddy buddy. This is not a time to try and make friends with the residents, right? If you do, that's cool if it happens organically. But this is a time to show that you really want this. It's so competitive that, like I said earlier, nobody cares about your board scores. Nobody cares about your research. Nobody cares about any of that. It's too competitive to be objective, which is crazy. Like it's to the point now where we just want the best person who fits in the best and also checked the boxes, so it's at a minimum, you've got to check boxes. And then now it's who is going to be best for our program and who is our program going to be best for. Does that make sense? And so you really, like I said, that person who ended up in our top who had nothing going for them on paper, they literally just kept quiet for 3 weeks. They worked really hard. And like the fourth week, we're like, man, this person's pretty good. And he's not annoying and he just kind of gets his work done. And it's like, I like him. That's it. Like, and so that's my advice on that is when you're on these rotations, you have to be all business. Don't be stiff, obviously, but like I mean, this is not like you're just one crazy statement away from people thinking a little different about you. And even if it only drops you from like number 2 to number 4, that's the difference in matching in that program. And all it takes is one program ranking you to match and you are set. So you have 5 auditions, you have 5 chances to really make this happen for yourself. And your whole goal, you don't need more than one program, right? You don't need choices. If you do, cool, good for you. Love it for you. You need one program to buy in on you, right? And you just do that by keeping your head down. Never be late, ever. Never be on your phone around the residents, ever. Never, ever be the last person out of the building. Like these are just simple things, right? And the phone thing's so old school. I feel it's not even old school. Like that just was a thing. Like you weren't supposed to be on your phone when I was growing up around people when you were supposed to be paying attention. People don't get that now. I mean, you'll be in a conference and people will be on Instagram. They'll be, like bring a book with you. Be so neurotic that you refuse to even read ortho bullets on your phone, right? Like bring a book and read the ortho book and sit in the corner. If things are, if the residents in there typing notes, you don't need to spark a conversation with them. If they ask you a question, answer it. If if it seems like they're trying to tool around, cool, have fun. But like, if it's just quiet and they just need to slam their notes and you're there, bring an ortho book and start looking up some stuff. Seriously, a paperback book. Like don't be on your phone. Like you just never know. Again, it's a big game. We had people who we thought like they were so cool. They were zooming in for 2 years because it was COVID. They come and rotate us. They were like going to be a top pick for us. And then they show up and they're on their phone all the time and they're talking about stupid things. And it's like, guys, like we're just trying to work, like we're like, and we want to fit in with you in our work. And so that's my advice is really listen to Tyler, follow him on Twitter. He says some real stuff and he did things the right way. I talked to Tyler when he was a first or second year med student. We had this talk before it was a PowerPoint, and Tyler became like the most competitive DO ortho applicant I've ever seen. So shout out to him. This is the game. I keep talking about the game. There's stuff that's going to pass filters. There's stuff that's going to impress attendings, and there's stuff that's going to impress residents. They're all different, and you need all of them. And so I really encourage you to think about where you fit in this into the game and try and position yourself well, because it's just so competitive right now. You really got to think about all these things. The earlier you think about them, the better. But if you haven't thought about them until you're a fourth year, well, then you're just going to have to really shine on auditions. And I have full confidence that if you're the right person, it's going to work out for you. It just makes it a little harder, but you can totally do it. This is my contact info. That email is not real. Don't email me. Just text me. It's way better for me. Um, yeah, so I'll take any questions anyone has. I can be on here as long as you guys need. And we'll go from there.